This week's discussion board article was entitled "The Saints and the Roughnecks," and it was written by William Chambliss. It is another good article, but it revolves around two groups of young men that are in the title, the Saints and, of course, the Roughnecks. The author begins this article by describing a group of 8 young men who were constantly occupied with truancy, drinking, wild driving, petty theft, and vandalism. However, they were considered to have promising futures by those who knew them. The students were located at Hannibal High, and they were not reprimanded by residents and parents. This group of students was collectively labeled the Saints. Their classmates, however, were not as fortunate. The Roughnecks' activities were on par with the Saints, but they had a negative reputation with the police and community, and referring to the Roughnecks. Chambliss goes on to examine why there are groups with similar behavior, the Saints and the Roughnecks, but the perception of these two groups was vastly different. The Saints, they used deception to get out of class, but they did it in a way that was permissible. They went somewhere out of town as to be unrecognized by people that they met there, and they generally engaged in minor mischief, but because they were spending money, their behavior was overlooked for the most part. On the weekends, the Saints escalated in their activities. They engaged in substance abuse and reckless behaviors. They often pulled pranks, used foul language as regular pursuits. They would try and tamper with road repairs so other drivers would damage their cars and then pretend as if they were so sorry that anything had happened at all. They were also vandalizing homes that were abandoned, and the police generally did not stop this group of high school students. Their personal view was that this was not delinquency and therefore needed no reprimand from the police. The Saints did well in school and were popular. How could they be seen this way when their behavior was completely opposite? The group never studied or completed any homework. One of the Saints did encounter consequences in terms of schoolwork, but his not playing the game by the rules could explain why he faced the consequences of his actions while his friends did not. Police encounters saw the Saints apologize and repent very quickly to avoid any sanctions or punishment. When we look at the Roughnecks, they engaged in about the same level of inappropriate behavior as the Saints, but the community's perception about them were vastly different. The Roughnecks weren't dressed as nice or well-mannered or behaved. They had constant trouble with the police. They fought, they stole, and they drank. The Roughnecks disliked and mistrusted the police as much as the police disliked and mistrusted them. Some of the Roughnecks had even spent time in jail. However, none had been to court, but no one had been sentenced to the boys' school for reformation. The Roughnecks were pretty well behaved in school, but considered it a burden. If a Roughneck encountered much trouble, they would threaten a teacher. Teachers sometimes passed the boys in class despite their poor performance. This also occurred with the Saints, but there was a different perception about the Saints versus the Roughnecks. The Roughnecks were generally C students, but superior athletes compared to the Saints, who were considered B students. Now, the author explains the difference of attention by the authorities to the two groups. First, by delinquency. The Saints had a higher number of illegal acts than the Roughnecks, and the activities by the Roughnecks were more costly to property, whereas the Saints' activities and misdeeds were not. The Saints never fought, while the Roughnecks welcomed physical confrontations. The Saints had more money than the Roughnecks and could get out of sight by using their cars. The Roughnecks didn't have this advantage, and when they were in sight, usually such as public places, maybe even a drugstore that is mentioned here in the article, where authority figures could see them and more likely to apprehend them if need be. The Saints apologized when they were in trouble, whereas the Roughnecks took the opposite approach and tried to escalate the conflict rather than to try to make it go away. The eyes of authority saw bias between the two groups, and that worked to the disadvantage of the Roughnecks. The Saints enjoyed many success in college and careers except for one. Only one of the students had a bad ending. Most of the Roughnecks, however, were headed for trouble and fulfilled the community's expectations. The Roughnecks agreed with the community's perception of them, and the author found this to be a common reaction in which those considered deviant begin also to see themselves as deviant. So I hope my thoughts here can help you either remember some of the information you've read or to help you begin your post. And please put that in the discussion board online. Thank you.